Hello, my name is Jerome Fascione. I am in my 20th year of teaching at Bellarmine College Preparatory. I teach U.S. history to juniors, and I teach African American experience to seniors, and I coach two freshman basketball teams, the A and the B team. I'd like to begin by thanking Carlos and the campus ministry team for inviting me to speak with you today. We are in the middle of a very tumultuous time with the murder of George Floyd resulting in protests throughout the whole country while we're in the midst of a pandemic. I would also like to thank Father Wade for the powerful reading from Matthew, of which I took a great deal from. When I teach, I like to have a starting point and work my way out. This reading provided the perfect starting point for me. My God, why have you forsaken me? Let me repeat that. My God, why have you forsaken me? These are the words that resonate so strongly for me from the reading. As George Floyd was a man of God, I can only imagine that those were the thoughts rushing through his head as he breathed his last breath. Most of you know that I am not a heavily religious individual, so I spent several moments trying to really understand the passage, and in the end, I couldn't help but see the correlation between Jesus and George Floyd. Both men who died for the structural ills of a society that they lived in. I am speaking to you today about much more than just finding justice for George Floyd. This has been and will continue to be the outcome for many in America if we don't address the root causes of these injustices. I am so very tired of this narrative repeating itself over and over. This is about much more than just police brutality. This movement is about the inequality and imbalance of opportunity in this nation based on the color of an individual's skin and the economic standing that exacerbates that problem. In the land of America, race and class have been directly correlated since the first slave ships arrived in 1619. This conversation will be an uncomfortable one for many of you, but I ask that you please listen with open hearts. I want to emphasize that this is not a problem that the African American community can fix alone. We have been trying to address the inequalities in this country since the beginning. Whether it was Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, or Martin Luther King Jr. What we need now is for the majority of Americans to stand up and say, this is not the America that was envisioned in the founding documents. What we need to do now is undo 400 years of systemic racism that has plagued this land throughout slavery, sharecropping, segregation, and the long-lasting legacy of the before-mentioned eras. Understand, slavery ended in 1865, but we still feel the ramifications of it today. Segregation ended in 1964, but we still feel the legacy of segregation today. For me, this issue has spanned my entire life. As a young boy in Southern California, I was called the N-word so many times it just became a norm to me. I was prevented from playing with some of my classmates for the simple fact that I was not white. I was treated differently by teachers who automatically assumed I was just another dumb athlete. I never felt like I truly belonged because of how I looked. As I grew up, I began to learn that this was going to be a country in which I would have to navigate very carefully if I was going to find success. I was going to have to prove myself at every turn to convince people that I was safe. An example, when I was 18, I was living in an apartment with some of the guys I played ball with, and I needed a job, so I called the local 7-Eleven that was around the corner. I asked them if they were hiring. They responded with, "Of course we are. Come on in, fill out an application." I took the 3-minute walk to the 7-Eleven and walked in and asked if they had applications. They quickly replied, "I'm sorry, we are not hiring." I realized in that moment that the color of my skin, the way I looked, was going to impact me and my opportunities. I have multiple employment stories just like that one. Socially, I can't begin to tell you the toll looking the way I do has taken on me emotionally. The amount of times I have been asked, "What are you doing here?" when I was in an area where people that look like me simply are not. People crossing the street when they see me walking in their direction. Being followed in stores by security guards, and even being afraid to pull my phone out of my pocket in the fear that they will think I am stealing something. When I enter a store, I always buy at least one thing, even if they don't have what I need, because I've been stopped enough in my life for shoplifting that I don't want to deal with it. Until all Americans have a real chance of success, we will have these problems. Until all Americans are outraged that some in this country are born into situations that deny them the ability for success, we will continue to be plagued with these problems. History is real. The effects of history are real. We must address the inequalities that have existed in this land since 1619, continued through the creation of this nation in 1776, and continue until today. I am not an example of an African American man who made it through the system. I am an example of an African American male who was afforded opportunities to be successful in America. If more African Americans were afforded this opportunity, we would not be facing the crisis we are in as a nation. I want to share one last story with you. I was driving with my young son, Jerome, and we were pulled over by a police officer. The officer approached my car and asked for my ID and insurance. I asked him why I was pulled over, and his response was, "None of your business." So when the next thing he stated was, "Have you ever been on parole or in jail before?" And I turned to my son, Jerome, who was a young boy, and I turned back to the police officer and I said, "Why are you asking me that question?" And he said, "I ask everybody that question." I said, "You ask a 50-year-old Chinese man that," and his response was, "Well, people who fit the description." That is what we are facing in this country. I could list 100 stories similar to that story, both from me and from people I know. So if that doesn't bother you, we have a long way to go in this country. Thank you for listening.